August 15th, 1945, Okinawa. The air smelled of rain and smoke. The sky had that dull, white glare that comes after a typhoon. I was 24, barefoot, and alive by accident. For months, we had been told the Americans would kill us if we surrendered, that they would torture, dishonor, and humiliate us. I believed every word. Everyone did. So when I first saw them climbing the hillside toward our medical shelter, rifles slung over their shoulders, I pressed my hands together and whispered the only prayer I still knew. If I must die, let it be quickly. But they didn't kill me. They gave me water. One of them, tall, young, with freckles and eyes the color of the ocean, handed me a canteen and said something I didn't understand. When I tried to bow, he just shook his head and smiled. That smile terrified me more than his weapon. It didn't fit the picture I had carried in my mind of the American monster. We were marched down to the beach, about 30 of us. Nurses, clerks, a few wounded soldiers. The path was lined with ruined palm trees and rusting helmets. A jeep passed by, and for the first time, I saw the white star painted on its hood. I remember thinking how clean it looked against the mud. They took us to a fenced enclosure near the shore. Tents arranged in neat rows, guarded by Marines in khaki uniforms. There were signs in English and Japanese. Temporary detention, POW Area 17. It didn't feel like prison. It felt like waiting room for the end of the world. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of waves mixed with distant singing from the American camp. A radio somewhere playing music. I didn't recognize the melody, but it was gentle, like someone remembering home. Diary entry, August 16th. They do not shout. They do not beat us. Their eyes are tired, but not cruel. I don't understand this kind of mercy. At dawn, the guards ordered us into a line. I expected interrogation or punishment. Instead, they handed each of us a metal tray. A sergeant pointed toward a makeshift kitchen built from oil drums. "Breakfast," he said. I thought I'd misheard. When my turn came, a soldier with a white apron and a smile served me something steaming from a pot. It was golden, thick, and unfamiliar. Scrambled eggs. Next to it, he placed a slice of white bread, a small tin of fruit, and a cup of dark liquid that smelled bitter and warm. Coffee. For a long time, I just stared at it. My hands shook. I hadn't seen real food in weeks. Not since the field hospital ran out of rice, and we boiled grass to survive. I looked around. Others hesitated too. We were waiting for a trick, for the cruelty we'd been told was coming. Then one of the older nurses whispered, "It's safe. Eat." The first bite of egg nearly made me cry. It was soft, salty, impossibly rich. My stomach cramped from the shock of it, but I kept eating. Around me, women were weeping silently over their trays, mouths full. The Americans didn't mock us. They just watched, some smiling awkwardly, as if embarrassed by how hungry we were. That morning changed something inside me. Not just because I ate, but because I realized that kindness could be as powerful as a weapon. Diary entry, August 17th. I always thought mercy was a word for the dead. Now I see it as food for the living. After breakfast, they gave us soap and told us to bathe at the well. They even handed us clean towels. I remember scrubbing my skin until it turned red, as if I could wash away the years of slogans, the fear, the dirt of war. The Americans spoke to us through interpreters. They asked for names, ranks, and whether we were nurses or soldiers. They recorded everything carefully. But there was no shouting, no striking. They even said we could write letters once the mail routes opened. One young lieutenant, his name tag read M. Collins, tried to explain something to us using slow, patient words. I caught only fragments. Home soon. Safe. War finished. Finished. I didn't know what that meant yet. That night I sat by the fence watching the sea. The guards shared cigarettes and laughed. The smell of their coffee drifted toward us again. I closed my eyes and thought of my mother, who had died in the bombing of Naha, and wondered if she would forgive me for surviving. For the first time, I didn't feel like a soldier or a servant of an emperor. I felt like a human being who had simply run out of reasons to hate. But confusion lingered. How could the same men who had burned our cities now feed us breakfast? How could strength and gentleness live in the same uniform? I didn't have the answer. All I knew was that every story I'd been told about the Americans was wrong. Diary entry, August 18th. They eat so much: bread, meat, eggs, fruit, and yet they share it. They do not look hungry, not in their bodies, not in their hearts. I think that is what victory means. On the third morning, I saw a group of them carrying boxes labeled U.S. Army Rations Type B. One soldier noticed me watching and waved. He shouted something cheerful. I only caught one word: breakfast. I smiled without meaning to. That simple exchange, a wave, a laugh, a shared word, felt like the first fragile bridge between two worlds that had tried to destroy each other. Later that day, an American photographer entered the camp. He was small, thin, and quiet, his camera hanging from his neck. He took pictures of the tents, the women lining up for rations, even the guards. When he pointed the lens at me, I froze. Then he lowered it and said softly, "Okay." I nodded. The click of the shutter sounded like a heartbeat. I often wonder if that photograph still exists somewhere, a captured face between surrender and survival. That night, rain began to fall again, drumming softly on the canvas roof. Someone on the American side played a harmonica, the notes wandering through the night like ghosts finding their way home. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Tomorrow, I will eat again." And for the first time since the war began, I believed it. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe, leave a comment, or share it, so that the memories of those who lived through both cruelty and kindness are never forgotten. By the third week of August 1945, the island smelled of mud and metal. Every breeze carried the scent of burned palm wood and diesel fuel. But in our camp, another smell began to rise each morning: the warm, unfamiliar fragrance of American food. It was always strongest at dawn. The cooks started before sunrise, cracking eggs into metal pans, heating something that hissed and smoked. The scent drifted across the wire, and every Japanese prisoner turned their head toward it, eyes half closed, as if inhaling proof that the world hadn't ended after all. I was part of the medical group now, 20 nurses assigned to assist the Americans with basic sanitation duties. We cleaned tents, distributed water, recorded temperatures. They said it was to prevent disease, but I think it was also their way of giving us purpose. And purpose is a strange kind of mercy. The man who oversaw our section was Lieutenant Collins, the same one who had spoken slowly on the first day. He was young, maybe 25, with the polite stiffness of someone learning to be gentle after too much war. His Japanese was poor, but his patience was endless. "Anna?" he said once, trying to read my name tag. "No, Aiko." I nodded. "Aiko." He smiled and repeated it correctly. "Aiko-san." No one had said my name kindly in months. Every morning we stood in line for breakfast. The trays were metal, dented, still warm from the kitchen. The food never changed much: eggs, bread, sometimes canned peaches. Once there was something called pancakes, soft and sweet, covered in a golden syrup that smelled like burned sugar. I remember that taste even now, years later. One of the older women whispered, "It's too good." "They're trying to make us forget," I answered quietly. "Maybe they're trying to help us remember we're still alive." Diary entry, August 25th. Each meal is a miracle of ordinary things. The enemy who feeds you changes shape. He becomes human. There was a rhythm to life inside the camp. Morning, roll call, breakfast, work assignments. Afternoon, rest, letters, more food. Evening, the sound of laughter and music from the American side. They played songs I didn't know, fast, happy music filled with trumpets and drums. Sometimes, a few guards tried to teach us the words. "Don't fence me in," they sang, laughing at the irony. We didn't understand the lyrics, but the melody was contagious. One afternoon, Lieutenant Collins brought a crate to the nurse's tent. "Clothes," he said. Inside were khaki skirts, clean white blouses, and worn shoes. They smelled faintly of soap and sea salt. As I held one blouse, he added, "Better than uniforms, yes?" I touched the fabric and nodded. I wanted to tell him that the last time I had worn white, it had been stained red in a field hospital near Shuri Castle. But the words stayed locked behind my tongue. That evening, I washed the blouse by hand and hung it outside the tent. Watching it sway in the wind felt like watching a flag I could finally believe in. There were other small acts that broke through the silence between us. A soldier shared his chocolate ration with a child prisoner. Another offered a newspaper with pictures of New York. Tall buildings, smiling faces. One even tried to draw Mount Fuji from memory to make us laugh. We didn't understand everything they said, but we understood tone. Tone is universal. Still, not everyone could accept the kindness. Some of the older soldiers spat at the ground when Americans passed. One man whispered, "They humiliate us with pity." I understood his anger, but I also knew that pride couldn't feed an empty stomach. That night, as I sat outside, I noticed the moon reflecting on the barbed wire, the same moon that shone on their side, too. I realized that even boundaries made of steel couldn't divide the sky. Diary entry, August 27th. There is a word the interpreter taught me today. Forgiveness. I asked him what it means. He said, to stop fighting, even inside your heart. The next morning, breakfast was delayed. When we reached the line, the cook's tent was quiet, smoke rising gently from the barrel stove. I peeked inside and froze. An American cook, a broad man with sleeves rolled up, was spooning out rice. Real, white rice. For weeks I had dreamed of it. The smell, the soft steam. When my turn came, he smiled and said, "Special for you today." I wanted to cry. The enemy had just given me the taste of home. I ate slowly, afraid the moment would vanish if I swallowed too quickly. Around me, women whispered arigato again and again, bowing instinctively, even though the Americans waved it off with embarrassment. Later, when Collins came to check our tent, I said the only English I knew, "Thank you." "Rice? Thank you." He smiled, a little sad. "It's just breakfast." But I shook my head. "No, it's peace." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe that's what peace tastes like. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the wrecked hills, I sat by the fence again, writing. The waves lapped quietly against the shore, and I thought about the contradiction of it all. How the men who had bombed our cities were now feeding our bodies, and somehow, our dignity. It made no sense, and yet it was the first truth I could believe in. When I finished writing, I closed the notebook and whispered into the wind, "If tomorrow they feed us again, I will start to forgive." I didn't know who I was speaking to. The Americans, the dead, or myself, maybe all of them. That night, before sleeping, I dreamed of my mother. She was standing by the family stove in Naha, stirring miso soup, smiling softly, but this time, the smell wasn't of miso. It was coffee. And she said, "Eat, Aiko. There will always be another morning." When I woke, the dawn light was pale and gold, and from the kitchen tent, once again, came that smell. Eggs, bread, and hope. By early September, the rains had ended, and the air over Okinawa turned heavy and sweet again. The mangled palm trees began to sprout new green. From the camp's edge, I could see fishing boats returning to the water. Small dots of life daring to exist after months of death. Inside the American compound, the days had become strange in their simplicity. We woke with the sound of the bugle, lined up for head count, ate breakfast that still seemed too generous for captives. The smell of coffee was our sunrise, the rattle of tin trays our morning prayer. I had started to help in the kitchen, alongside 2 other nurses and the American cook named Sergeant Wilkins, a giant of a man from Tennessee with arms thick as tree trunks. When he laughed, it was like thunder rolling off the sea. He called everyone kid, even the officers. At first, I only cleaned pots and carried water, but one morning he handed me a spoon and said, "You stir." The pot was full of something yellow and creamy, scrambled eggs mixed with powdered milk. I stirred carefully, the steam fogging my glasses. "Like that," Wilkins said, nodding with approval. "Don't burn it. Soldiers hate burned eggs." He smiled, and for a second, I saw not a soldier, but a man who simply wanted breakfast done right. When we served the food later, he whispered, "You cooked that, Aiko. You." It was the first time in months that I had created something, instead of destroying or patching what war had broken. I felt warmth in my chest, a fragile, human pride. Diary entry, September 3rd. I fed them today. The men who fed me. Maybe this is what forgiveness looks like. Small acts that return the world to ordinary. Later that week, a supply ship arrived. Crates piled high with rations, canned goods, medical supplies, and letters. The Americans read theirs aloud, laughing or crying. The sound of English filled the camp like a river of life. Then something unexpected happened. Collins approached our group of nurses and handed each of us a folded sheet. "From your families," he said softly. Translated by the Red Cross. I hesitated before unfolding mine. The handwriting was neat, the characters careful. It was from my brother, written from a repatriation center on Kyushu. "Aiko, I heard you are alive. Father is gone. Mother died during the raid. But if you can eat, if you can sleep, then you have already won something. Live." I folded the letter and pressed it to my lips. For the first time since the surrender, I let myself cry. That night, I sat near the wire fence. The Americans were celebrating something. A baseball victory, perhaps. They sang a song I had heard before, "You Are My Sunshine." Their voices floated into the night, like pieces of a new world being built right beside the ruins of the old one. I began to hum along, quietly at first, then louder. A guard looked over, startled, then smiled and joined in, keeping rhythm by tapping his rifle butt on the ground. For a few minutes, there was no language, no enemy, just music between us. The next morning, the sea was calm. Collins came to our tent early, holding a clipboard. "Good news," he said slowly. "Some of you, nurses, civilians, you will go home soon. Transport to Japan mainland. Home." The word struck like a stone in the chest. None of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "When?" He smiled. "Soon, maybe a week." After he left, silence filled the tent. Hilda, the German nurse I had met weeks before, would have smiled at that moment, but she wasn't here. The camp was only ours now, our island between defeat and return. That afternoon, I worked in the kitchen again. Wilkins taught me to fry something he called French toast. It was sweet, heavy with sugar, golden in the light. "American breakfast of champions," he said proudly. "Eat." I tasted it. It melted on my tongue. "How? You have sugar still?" I asked. He grinned. "America's got sugar for days, kid." I laughed, an unsteady, surprised laugh that came from somewhere deep. Later, I watched him hand the same food to a wounded Japanese soldier, who bowed awkwardly before taking it. There was no hatred left in either of them, only fatigue and a quiet respect born from survival. Diary entry, September 8th. It is possible to eat beside an enemy and forget who started the fire. Maybe hunger is stronger than hate. That evening, as the sky bled into pink and violet, I walked to the edge of the camp where the barbed wire met the cliff. From there, I could see the Pacific stretching endless and blue, the sun sinking into it like an ember. A group of Marines were gathered nearby, writing letters home. One of them, young and sunburned, looked up and said, "You'll be home soon too, miss." I didn't answer, just smiled faintly. He nodded, understanding that sometimes silence was enough. The next day, I helped clean the medical tent for the last time. Collins came by to inspect it, hands clasped behind his back. He looked at me and said, "You've done good work, Aiko. Your record will say that." "Record?" I asked. He nodded. "So your name won't disappear." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of his words. Not disappear. After years of serving an empire that had turned people into numbers, the idea that someone cared enough to record a name felt like redemption. The following morning, as I carried a pot of boiling water from the kitchen, I heard the ocean again. Louder now, closer. A typhoon was coming. The guards began tying down tents, shouting orders. I joined them instinctively, helping secure ropes and barrels. For an hour we worked side by side, Japanese prisoners and American soldiers, hands slipping on wet canvas, faces streaked with sweat. When the first hard rain came, we all dove under the same shelter, laughing at the thunder. No sides, no flags, just humans waiting out the storm. When the wind finally eased, the camp smelled like salt and life. Someone brought out coffee. We drank together, huddled in silence, and I realized then, peace wasn't a treaty or a headline. It was this, the moment when enemies shared the same roof and no one reached for a weapon. Diary entry, September 10th. If war can teach cruelty, peace must be learned slowly. One breakfast, one song, one kindness at a time. The next morning, Collins handed me a slip of paper. "Departure tomorrow," he said. "You ready?" I looked at the camp around me, the tents, the guards, the kitchen stove where I'd stirred eggs. No, I said softly, but I'll go. That night, I wrote my last words inside the small, weather-stained diary. Tomorrow I leave the place where I stopped being afraid of the enemy and started to believe in people again. Then I closed the book, set it beside my cot, and listened to the sea until morning. September 12th, 1945. Okinawa's sky was washed clean after the typhoon. The air was cool, clear, and smelled faintly of salt and diesel. Trucks lined the dirt road outside the camp gate, engines rumbling, their sides painted with white stars. A handwritten sign in both English and Japanese read, "Transport to Repatriation Zone." I stood with the others in line, 40 women, a few wounded soldiers, and children who no longer flinched at loud sounds. Each of us carried a small canvas bag, a blanket, and a piece of paper with our name and number. I had become used to numbers, but that morning, I was Aiko again. Lieutenant Collins was at the gate, clipboard in hand. When he saw me, he smiled. The same calm, tired smile I'd first noticed the day I arrived, half-starved and terrified. "Going home, Aiko," he said slowly, as if trying to make sure I heard every word. I nodded. "Home," I echoed. The syllable tasted unfamiliar, like a language I was relearning. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small paper packet. "Breakfast for the road," he said. Inside were 2 biscuits, a piece of chocolate, and something wrapped in wax paper. Scrambled eggs, still warm. The same food that had made me cry the first time I tasted it. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I bowed deeply. "Thank you. For everything," he said. "You'll be fine." But his eyes looked away as if he didn't quite believe it himself. We boarded the trucks. The engines coughed and roared to life. The Americans waved as we pulled away. Big, broad figures framed against the rising sun. They looked impossibly tall, impossibly steady, as though the war had ended for them a little sooner than for the rest of us. I held the warm packet in my hands as the road wound toward the harbor. Around us, Okinawa was a field of ghosts. Burned villages, empty fields, wrecked tanks, half buried in mud. But between the ruins, I saw children playing again. A boy ran barefoot through the road, chasing a paper scrap that danced in the wind. Life was already rebuilding itself, quietly, stubbornly. At the harbor, the sea glittered pale blue. A U.S. Navy transport ship waited offshore, its deck crowded with men in khaki. We were ferried across in small landing craft. The sound of the motor and the slap of waves against steel made my heart race. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the noise. When I stepped aboard, a sailor offered his hand to steady me. His palm was calloused, strong. "Watch your step, ma'am," he said. I smiled faintly at the word ma'am, a title I had never been given before the war. They guided us below deck to a compartment lined with cots. The air was thick with fuel and salt, but it was clean. I sat on a bunk and unwrapped my breakfast. The eggs had cooled, but I didn't care. Each bite was warm in memory, if not in heat. Diary entry, September 12th. I am leaving the island where I stopped hating. The Americans fed me eggs and bread. But what they really fed me was the belief that kindness can survive even after nations cannot. The voyage to Japan took 2 days. I spent most of it on deck, watching the horizon. The ocean was endless, glittering with sunlight, as if nothing terrible had ever happened upon it. I thought about the faces I'd left behind. Wilkins with his laugh like thunder. The guards who whistled swing music. Collins with his patient, unflinching kindness. On the second night, I shared my last biscuit with a child. A thin girl whose parents had died in the caves near Naha. She smiled shyly, crumbs on her lips, and whispered "arigato." I said, "It's American," and she laughed softly, then "thank you" in both languages. When we reached the port of Kagoshima, the ship anchored just offshore. The smell of home hit me like a wave. Seaweed, smoke, the faint sweetness of land after rain. A group of Japanese officers in worn uniforms waited at the dock, taking names, assigning us to temporary shelters. As I stepped onto the pier, I looked back one last time. The American flag snapped in the wind, bright against the sky. I thought of how I had once been told to hate that flag, to see it as the symbol of destruction. Now it looked like the color of survival. That night, in the repatriation center, we were given rice, miso soup, and tea. Familiar smells, familiar textures. Yet none of it tasted as alive as those strange American breakfasts, because it wasn't the food itself I missed. It was what it had meant. Mercy had a flavor, and once you've tasted it, you never forget. Weeks later, when I found my brother in Fukuoka, he didn't recognize me at first. My face was thin, my eyes different. "You've changed," he said quietly. "Yes," I answered. "I learned how big people can be." He frowned, not understanding. I smiled. The Americans were giants, not because of their weapons, because of their hearts. Diary entry. October 1st. I thought defeat would taste like ashes. Instead, it tasted like breakfast. Years later, when I would wake early and smell rice cooking, sometimes I still thought I could hear the hum of those American stoves, the clatter of pans, the low voice of Sergeant Wilkins saying, "Don't burn it, kid." I kept my old diary all my life. Its last page remained blank until the day I knew what to write. Kindness is not the opposite of war. It is what survives it. I wrote those words slowly, folded the notebook, and placed it beside my tea. And if you're listening to this now, know that sometimes history is not only written by the victors, it's remembered by the survivors who learned to see humanity in their captors. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it. Subscribe, leave a comment, or tell someone that compassion, even on a battlefield, can change everything. Because that truth, simple as bread, warm as eggs, is what kept me alive.